Hello, this is a talk on St. John of the Cross, Radical Contemplative for Conversations at Ennismore. The live talk was given on the 17th of October, but the recording didn't work. So I've gone home and recorded this talk now with the slides, which is pretty much the same as the one which was given at Ennismore a couple of weeks ago. This talk is going to be, depending on whether the Zoom allows me more than half an hour, I may be in two parts, or if it lets me record onwards, it'll be in one part. And during this talk, I'll be looking at the main writings of John of the Cross. Sometimes we only come across John of the Cross through books about him or sort of selected sayings. But I'll be trying to focus in this talk on the whole structure of John of the Cross as a spiritual teacher, that his writings have a sort of direction to them, and they can lead us to a deeper appreciation of contemplation. He's a radical contemplative in that he goes to the roots of what contemplation is about. And in order to do this, I've put together some slides, pictures from art and from illustrations of his writing. So I'm going to share the screen and well. So this on the left here, you'll see a drawing by John of the Cross, which is the only drawing we have of his. It's a drawing he did of Christ crucified. Underneath you have his signature. This is separate from the drawing. The originality of this, John of the Cross lived in the 16th century. Was born in 1542 into Spain, and he inherited this medieval tradition of devotion to the suffering Christ, the humanity of Christ. And but he brings a new angle to it, a remarkable new angle. And this picture shows that in a symbolically, because of the angle with which he views Christ on the cross. It's an unusual one. Normally we see Christ on the cross from below or straight on, but here it's as if it's a God's eye view. The suffering is still there, but it's taken, the drawing is taken from the perspective of divine perspective. On the right, you'll see another Spanish artist, Salvador Dali, who in the 20th century was inspired by this drawing of John of the Cross and painted this painting of the crucifixion, which is in Glasgow Art Gallery. But again, what he was inspired by was the unusual angle on the crucifixion, which in some way hints at the resurrection at the same time. This devotion to the cross is, in a sense, key to John of the Cross as a spiritual person. He took it as his name, Joan de la Croix. He was, and from an early age, he had this sense of connection with Jesus in the Passion, and this comes through in his life. He had as a child, it was a life marked with suffering, but also with great love. That is, he doesn't focus so much on the sufferings of Jesus, but on the love shown through the sufferings. And this can be seen in his own childhood. His parents it was a marriage of love, in which broke the conventions of society at the time. 16th century Spain was very structured feudal society, really, with the different classes staying within their orbits. And John of the Cross, his father, was part of a wealthy merchant family in a villa, textile cloth family, but he fell in love with a poor weaving girl. And they married, and the father's family rejected the marriage, rejected John's father, didn't accept John's mother, and the children were never accepted. So he was alienated from his family, from the broader family, from an earlier age. And they lived in great poverty. They went to live in Medina del Campo, which is sort of between Avila and Valladolid in the center of Spain. And they worked as both parents as weavers. So it was a very basic lifestyle. But John, and there was 3 sons born. John is the youngest. But when John was only 2 years old, his father died. And this is why they're marked by this suffering, this great love marriage, but marked by this tragedy of the death of his father. And then a few years later, his older brother, Louis, died. The other brother, Francisco, lived on, and John was very close to him. But his mother and the boys tried to go back to Avila to see if the family would support them, but they didn't. So they lived an itinerant life, going from place to place, trying to earn a living. John was lucky enough to be finding education with the Jesuits in their school in Medina del Campo, and he was recognized for his talents. He worked in the local hospital there, and he was given an education, so that he then went on to join the Carmelites in Medina del Campo, and then went to study in the University of Salamanca. But he always stayed close to his brother and his mother while she was still alive, and helped them in their poverty. It was after his time in studying in Salamanca. He studied the scholastic theology of the time in the Carmelite college there, and he was a very proficient student. And his writings, especially his early book, the Ascent to Mount Carmel, is structured in a very scholastic way. He's a mystic who is both a mystic but also very concerned with clarifying all his points very carefully, and using philosophy and scripture to make things, to illustrate things and to give examples. So he learned all that in the university. But after university, he felt this call to contemplation, and he actually felt that the Carmelites, as they were, which was quite an order engaged with the world, an apostolic order, was not contemplative enough. So he wanted to join the Carthusians, which was a hermit order. But he was on the verge of trying to make that change when he met Teresa of Avila, who was a Carmelite nun, who was trying to reform the Carmelites to become more contemplative. And she persuaded John to stay within the Carmelites and to work for the reform of the male branch of the order. And this became his vocation, his calling in life. This reform, Teresa got John to be the spiritual director for her nuns at the Encarnacion convent in Avila. This was the convent which was not reformed, but Teresa was still made abbess of as an attempt to try and sort of reconcile the two branches of the women's order. And John was spiritual director there. But then he went off to start his the male reform. But the male reform faced a lot of resistance and opposition from the other non-reformed Carmelites. And in 1577, he was captured and imprisoned by the Carmelite central monastery in Toledo, which is then the capital of Spain. And he stayed 9 months in this prison in Toledo. And it's this time of when he was in prison, in very confined and oppressive situation, that the poems started, the poems of John of the Cross. We have early writings from John, which are reflections on the Passion, which was this love of the cross, which goes back to an early stage. But then in the prison time, you get this sort of poetry, which is very mystical, and that's what is the basis of his later writings. At the time in prison, he was in a very small cell. It was apparently 6 foot by 4 foot. He was John himself was apparently a very small man, so he was able to stand up in it, but not able to move around much. And Teresa said that even for John, this was a small space, and he was treated very badly while he was there. There was flogging, and he was given no change of clothes during that time, and there was only a small window for light. So this time in Toledo was a dark night, and it begins of it's the sort of catalyst for his writing. This is a painting of Toledo by the artist El Greco, who was painting. It was exact contemporary of John of the Cross. He was from Crete originally. He was a painter from Crete who then went to study in Venice and then ended up working in Spain. And he was painting a lot in Toledo at the very time when John of the Cross was in prison. There you have the Carmelite house, which is the second big house, the big fort at the top, and then the cathedral to the left, and then the big house underneath, which was apparently the Carmelite headquarters. And down there in the cellars, John was in prison while this painting was being made. Something of the spirituality of John of the Cross, I feel, is captured in El Greco's paintings. This contrast of light and darkness, this drama, and the sort of. So we'll look at that in some of the Passion writings that John wrote in a moment. So this is again El Greco, and the Passion writings that John wrote, early ones, were about meditating on the Passion of Jesus. This was classic medieval spirituality, but he gave a new angle to it. He focused less on the physical sufferings as on the psychological sufferings. So he meditates on the Garden of Gethsemane, and this time Christ went through a psychological suffering. He said that he sweated blood through facing the fear of and the surrender to what was coming. So when he says, "Not my will, but thy will be done," just letting go of his own will. So this the Passion really for John starts, and in a sense is really focused in the Gethsemane experience, which he went through himself in his imprisonment. This sense of being even by his superiors. These were his religious superiors imprisoning him, the Carmelites, and somehow he had to learn to forgive them and accept that even this was God's will. This sense of even by the one who's supposed to be looking after him, his superiors were treating him terribly. The next thing John focuses on, again here depicted by El Greco, is the disrobing of Christ. It's not a normal part of, we don't reflect on it very often, how he was stripped of his clothes. And this image of stripping, everything being taken away, humiliation, vulnerability, a sort of losing everything that you had built up in your life, is part of the spirituality of John of the Cross, that we go through this stripping and this purification, and we become naked in a sense spiritually, as Christ was physically. The next depicted here by El Greco again is Christ on the cross, where has this sense of abandonment by God. That God had God had been with him. He'd been doing God's will, but at this point he goes, my God, why have you forsaken me?" And this sense of abandonment by God, being stripped of any sense of the presence of God, is part of the dark night of the spirit. In a sense, the stripping of the clothes is the dark night of the senses, where we lose what comforts us physically. And this lama sabachthani is the dark night of the spirit, where we lose the comfort of the sense of God's presence. And this is the deeper stripping. Even here, John points out that he's misunderstood. He calls Eli, Eli, lama sabachthani, and those around him think that he's calling on Elijah, and they think that he's going to bring him down. Well, actually, he's calling on God. So it's this sense of not only being abandoned by the sense of being abandoned by God, but also the being misunderstood by those around you, being judged by them, being falsely accused, as John was throughout his life. He had this. And then we have the dying on the cross, here depicted again by El Greco. This dying is, John says that when we have to, in a sense, we have to carry our cross to the point of death. This is why he's a radical contemplative. It's not, we have to let go into death in order for resurrection to happen. And it's this this transition from carrying the cross to dying on the cross, which is the movement from the dark night of the senses to the dark night of the spirit. And when we carry the cross, we're doing it ourselves. We're learning to let go of our attachments, our desires. We're learning to carry the sufferings in our lives. But the crucifixion happens to us. Jesus was nailed to the cross. Other people crucified him. So this is the passive night, when it happens not because we're doing this purification, but it is done to us. And we enter into it passively through the difficult things of life. This could be, for John, it's this being oppressed by his own religious superiors who are supposed to be looking after him. It's the loss of the sense of the presence of God. But it can be any human difficulty whereby we can sense that we are overwhelmed by in our lives, an illness, a family loss, a breakdown of a relationship, warfare. This happens again. We wouldn't choose it, and John says this, that we wouldn't enter the dark night of the spirit through our own choice. We're led there. And then John focuses on the taking down of Jesus from the cross, and the sense of when we're in this state of suffering, we need loving companions. We need people who will hold us during this time, because it's the best thing is to have a friend, someone who can reassure you that they're there for you, and that they can show you their love. And he was a spiritual director and spent a lot of his time doing spiritual direction. And he always said the main thing was to make yourself available to people, and to be the love of God through your presence. So this community of Jesus's mother and Mary Magdalene and Joseph of Arimathea is the real spiritual community. And then he touches on the resurrection, which is this depicted here in this painting, marvelous painting by El Greco, which is we've which is the opposite of the disrobing of Christ. It's the enrobing, the being given the glorious vestments of the resurrection. So we're stripped naked, but then we're given a new body in the resurrection. They're depicted here through the vestments. The body is, in some sense, a clothing of the soul. So we are given a new clothing of the soul in the resurrection, and it's a glorious body. And this sense of El Greco takes this from a line in the St. John's Apocalypse about the receiving a new garment. So this is the sort of backdrop, the devotional backdrop to John's writing after his imprisonment. The imprisonment, he wrote some poems, and he, when he came out, he managed to escape. After 9 months in this prison, he somehow managed to escape by befriending the jailer and then getting away. And he escaped quickly to Madrid, where he met Teresa, and Teresa realized he was still in a lot of danger, and sent him down to the south of Spain, where he actually spent pretty much the rest of his life working in the south of Spain, founding monasteries. It was safer there, away from the center of the Carmelite authorities, and he founded his discalced monasteries for the rest of his life. Very active life with these foundations. He was traveling all the time. But he also took time to write, and the writings are basically 4 books, which are reflections on the poems, either the poem which he wrote in the prison, as the spiritual canticle was, or a poem like Dark Night of the Soul, which was written soon afterwards and reflects the moment when he escapes from prison, or other poems that he wrote soon after, like The Living Flame of Love. And so these books come out of that time of spiritual inspiration and desolation, which was paradoxically his imprisonment. The Ascent of Mount Carmel is the first book, and it's the most structured and scholastic, and sometimes difficult to read, because it's, in some ways, it starts right at the ascent of a mountain is quite traditionally given as the journey of contemplation, but John does start with getting the foundations right, which is what they call ascetic theology, and the whole first book really is dealing with the active night of the senses, which is through the self-discipline, letting go of desires. It's a great sort of critique of desire. As T.S. Eliot said, desire in itself is not desirable. So the things, we may desire things, but the experience of desire is not desirable, and it's an experience of lack. And in order to find God, we have to let go of this experience of lack to find the fullness of God. And we do that by a purification of desire. So the Ascent to Mount Carmel, yes, it's based on other spiritual works, which The Life of Moses by Gregory of Nyssa, which talks about Moses going up Mount Sinai, the Spiritual Ladder by John Climacus. So this is in a tradition of the mountain spirituality. John opens it with a little drawing or diagram. Here we have the diagram which John drew himself, which gives the structure of that mountain. It's often in the books, they have the actual diagram. Often it's printed nowadays with a more modern version, where a ruler is used and a compass. but it's the same thing. And the journey. Oh, here we have a clearer depiction of it. This is sideways though. The journey up the mountain, you see at the center there, the path of Mount Carmel, the perfect spirit. Then it goes on, nada, nothing, nada, 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 nothing. And even on the mount, nothing. This is the letting go. That whole first part of the journey is a letting go of everything. It's letting go of the physical consolations, and it's letting go of spiritual consolations. So what he calls the goods of earth and the goods of heaven, that it's not any of those. So we have to learn to let go of all those to be prepared to be led to the second stage of the mountain, which is depicted more in this circular thing, which is where grace takes over and leads the soul up to the top of the mountain. At the top, it says here, there is no longer any way at the top of the Mount Carmel. For the just person, there is no law. They are a law unto themselves, because grace has led them, and they've been through this purification. But most of the ascent to Mount Carmel deals with this earlier part. It's only the later books which deal with the passive purification, which comes after this. So most of the ascent to Mount Carmel is about things like, as he says here, to come to the knowledge of all, you desire the knowledge of nothing, to come to possess all, desire the possession of nothing, to arrive at being or desire to be nothing. These paradoxical Zen-like sayings, which are about the letting go that is needed in order to move on from one step to the next. And sometimes it can seem, especially in Center Mount Carmel, that John is a little dualistic. That is, that he denies the goods of this earth or the spirit goods of heaven even. But what he's really trying to do is free us from attachment to anything. So he says of the goods of the earth, once you let go of attachment to them, we can then enjoy them more, but without the desire, without that wanting. He says, now that I least desire them, I have them all without desire. So he has possessions, joy, knowledge, consolation, rest. But the more I desired to seek them, the less I had of them. And the same with the spiritual goods of heaven: glory, joy, knowledge, consolation, rest. If we seek them, then we have less of them. But if we no longer desire them, then we have them all without desire. So it's a very thorough sort of purification of the passions in this text. Oops. Oh, this is a colorful version which shows the paths. He also is he's concerned to show the direct path, the quickest path up the mountain, which is this nada, 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 letting go. He doesn't deny that the goods of earth or the goods of heaven can be a way up the mountain, but there's a lot of meandering as you get attached to things along the way. So he's writing this book for his Carmelite novices in the Reform, and he's wanting them to go take the quickest route to the union with God and not get distracted. This is another drawing of it, the narrow path of perfection. Anyway. Now, John of the Cross uses a traditional theology, but brings it in a new direction. So he works with this, what I spoke of, this mountain tradition, where you move from the base of the valley to the peak of the mountain, and you move from beginner, which are beginner, proficient, and perfect. And these correspond to the purgative way, the illuminative way. Purgative way is where you let go of things, you're purified. The illumination is when you get a sense of God's presence, and the unitive is the union with God. And like Teresa, he was very concerned that this union with God was part of the spiritual path. It's one of the great things that was missing in the spiritual life, that somehow I and the Father are one. Jesus invites us to that very same experience of union with God that he had. That's nothing, he's holding back nothing in his self-gift of his relationship with his Father. So that a union with the Father is part of the heritage of Christian life. And the Spanish mystics are that's their main thing, is all aimed in that, towards that. But this was the traditional way of presenting it, which John uses: beginner, proficient, perfect, purification, illumination, contemplation. I've put in various different ways of describing that. Meeting Jesus in the purgative way, walking with Jesus in the illuminative way, where prayer is simplified, and then union with Christ in the unitive way, where prayer becomes contemplation, and Christ begins to be the pray within us. Now, the way John changes this, the originality of John, which makes him distinct from this earlier tradition. Most of it, there are examples like Cloud of Unknowing, which have a similar structure, but the originality is this second dark night. Now, most writers say there's a dark night of sense during the purification of the beginner, where we're stripped of our immediate pleasures. But few see that from then on there's a second dark night where we're stripped of illumination, the illuminative path, this sense of God's presence and the experience of God is taken away from us. So the illuminative path leads into a second dark night, where everything that we think we're gaining, we lose. And we think we've gone back again, but actually we haven't gone back. John says this second dark night is the springboard for the unitive, the union. We have to lose our sense of God before we are united with God, because any sense of God is another, and the union with God is beyond self-consciousness, because God becomes all in all. So this is the originality of John, is this dark night of the spirit, really. So the journey is through active night of the sense, which is the bit we do, where we let go of our attachments through our own discipline and focus on God. We're led into the passive night of the sense, when these attachments are taken from us, one way or another, whether we like to or not. And then we're led into the active night of the spirit, where we learn to let go of divine consolations, any sense of, we might be looking in our time of prayer for peace, an experience of peace or rest, or but even that can be a distraction, in that we have to look for God without any not tied to any particular experience. So we let go of that, and we're led into the passive night of the spirit, which is where we're led into this union with God solely through grace, not through anything we do ourselves. Just to end this bit on the Ascent of Mount Carmel book, John ends the book rather abruptly. He has this plan at the beginning of the book to cover the whole mountain, and he doesn't. He really ends after the initial active night of the senses, and he ends with a description of the growth in virtues, how by letting go of these desires, we allow the virtues to grow. So we learn, instead, for example, gossip, the natural inclination to gossip about people and to speak ill of people behind their backs. As we let go of that, we learn the virtue of charity. We learn the virtue of charity and humility, the fact that who am I to judge? It's a great wisdom to know how to be silent and to look at neither the remarks nor the deeds nor the lives of others. This virtues, I won't go into this because we won't have time, is this is why in some sense he's a radical contemplative. He's not concerned with just adding up virtues. He's concerned with getting to the roots of virtue. And then in order to, prior to that, you have to get to the roots of what is vice. And that's egoism, this self-centeredness for John. And the roots of the virtue is when is on the, as you see in the tree on the right, is humility. He says we come to the center of our humility, and from there the virtues start to grow. So he goes through very thoroughly in the ascent to Mount Carmel each of these vices and virtues and how the former is transformed into the latter. Through going to the root of where they come from. But we don't have time to go much into that. So this dark night of this ascent to Mount Carmel is this stripping of senses and spirit. In this nakedness of the spirit, that's the second dark night, the spirit finds its quietude and rest. Oops. For in coveting nothing, wanting nothing, nothing raises up and nothing raises the spirit up and nothing weighs the spirit down. So the spirit becomes free. It's no longer encumbered with anything and no longer desiring things because it's in the center of its humility. This not wanting things allows us to find who we really are and to find quietude and rest, peace, which is the basis of the next step in the contemplative path, which he doesn't talk about in this book, Ascent to Mount Carmel, but he talks about in his next book, in the more famous book, The Dark Night of the Soul. And this book takes off where the ascent ends. Some people argue it's the same book. It starts in a different style. It's commenting on the same poem, but it starts right at the beginning of the poem again, and comes at it from a slightly different angle, but focusing much more on the second dark night of the spirit. So this is his most famous book. It's a much shorter book, Dark Night of the Soul. It's less scholastic and more psychological. It deals with the psychological state of the sense of losing God. The sense of losing God is this sense that our faculties of reason, imagination, and will and memory can only lead us so far, like this little lamp. They only give us light to a certain degree, but they can't encompass God. So God is beyond the capacity of our faculties. In that sense, God is encountered as darkness because we can't understand him. We can't imagine God. It's nothing we can evoke from our memory. And though we can love God, we have to we cannot love God as an object because we can't see anything when we look for God. So John says, if a man or woman wishes to be sure of the road that they tread on, they must close their eyes and walk in the dark. Again, this is one of these paradoxes which make John of the Cross popular with Zen teachers, that the certainty of the spiritual path involves walking in the dark, not knowing where we're going. The earlier medieval text, the Cloud of Unknowing, talks about this also, this entering into the cloud of unknowing about God. Cloud of forgetting of is similar to the dark night of the senses, the cloud of unknowing similar to dark night of the spirit. But John, writing 2 centuries later, is much more psychological. He's not giving just a treatise on prayer. He's giving a treatise on, it's a pastoral treatise, especially Dark Night of the Soul, on the human experience of loss, which is involved along this path. So he's very concerned with the desolation that people can go through along this path, and to reassure them that if they're going through this, it doesn't mean that something has gone wrong or that they've been punished or have sinned, but that this sense of loss of God and this sense of not knowing where we're going can be the highway to a deeper relationship with God. So this is the poem. We'll look at the first half because there's both books, The Ascent of Mount Carmel and The Dark Night of the Soul, only comment on the first half of, well, not even that of this poem, but the second half we'll leave. But this is the poem he wrote soon after escaping from the prison, and it reflects that experience of escape, but it's also an allegory of escaping from the ego, from self-centeredness. The senses are quiet, and then the spirit is quiet in the darkness, and we're able to seek the one who we love. So he says, one dark night, fired with love's urgent longings, the sheer grace, I went out unseen, my house being now all stilled. In darkness and secure, by the secret ladder, disguised, the sheer grace. In darkness and concealment, my house being now all stilled. So in this, the beginning of the poem, he talked these 2 stillings, the house is stilled twice, are the 2 nights, the night of the sense and the night of the spirit. The night of the sense is fired with love's urgent longings, which it's our love of God which motivates us to let go of other things. In the second one, it's much more hidden and secret ladder, disguised, sheer grace, concealed. It's a hidden work which is leading to the night of the spirit. On that glad night, in secret, for no one saw me, nor did I look at anything, with no other light or guide than the one that burned in my heart. This is why it depicts his own escape from prison, very lucky escape, when no one saw him, but also depicts the spiritual path when he's let go of other things and he's not looking for other things, that this is inner guidance is leading him. This inner guidance guided me more surely than the light of noon to where he was awaiting me. Him I knew so well, there in a place where no one appeared. So the dark night leads to the beloved, the one, but the beloved is in the place where no one appears. Again, the paradox of the one you love is not an object that you can see. The one you love dwells within your own heart. And this is the journey that John depicts here. O guiding night, O night more lovely than the dawn, O night that has united the lover with his beloved, transforming the beloved in her lover. So this dark night leads to this union with God, with the beloved, and transforms. This is a very John of the Cross word, transforms. We see it in his last commentary, the living flame of love, transforms the beloved into the lover, into her lover. The second part of the poem he doesn't comment on in neither of these early books, and neither of Ascent or Dark Night, but it expresses this a union, and it expresses the spiritual espousals, this relationship with God, which is one of love, relationship with the beloved. But he focuses on this, not so much in this book, but on the Spiritual Canticle, which is his next book that he wrote. So I'll leave this bit of the poem for the Spiritual Canticle, because it's very similar to the imagery of that poem. In the Dark Night of the Soul, he focuses more on the having to go by way of the darkness. God has to work in the soul in secret and in darkness, because if we fully knew what was happening and what mystery, transformation God and God's grace will eventually ask of us, we would either try to take charge or to stop the whole process. We wouldn't want to go there, or we would want to be in charge of what's going on. But we can't be. We have to let go of being this egoism, this self-centeredness, and that's why it seems like a journey in darkness and in secret. This little kid says, the more I think, the more confused I get. And it's certainly so. In the dark night, the more we try and work out what's happening, the more confused we'll get. We simply have to surrender to the process. We don't know what's happening, but God is guiding us. And John reassures us that if our heart is in the right place, then God is guiding us, even if it seems everything else is going the wrong way or things are falling apart around us and within us. But if we keep this desire for God, then God works in God's way to lead us to union. But this way can lead through suffering. It normally does, because the purgation is difficult. We have to let go of self-centeredness, even a self-centered relationship with God, to love God, not for anything we get from God, so that we lose all those consolations along the way. So John says, when you're burdened, you're joined to God. This is part of the spirituality of the cross. We look at the cross and we see that Christ has been there, and we are joined to God through our own carrying of the cross. Christ is our strength, and he is with people who suffer. I'll leave that. That was a joke. Being with people who suffer is not always easy. So anyway, this wife is accompanying her husband. I do understand that you're going through the long, dark night of the soul, Robert, but couldn't you do it somewhere else? Sometimes this dark night of the soul is painful to ourselves and to others around us. And so we feel we're burdened to others. And this is why reading someone like John of the Cross reassures us that things may seem bad, but that God is working through it. So he's trying to lighten, in some sense, the burden. He does show that the sufferings can be extreme, but he does show that there's a light there, which is guiding us, and which we can trust, so that we don't. That's the difference between maybe the dark night and depression. Although John says there's sides of depression in the dark night, but there is this sense that we can trust the process. So in tribulation, it says, immediately draw near to God with confidence. This is this trust. And you will receive strength, enlightenment, and instruction. So whenever we're going through a hard time, just return to God with trust. And then we get this strength, enlightenment, and instruction. This is what he's teaching, not to blame ourselves, not to question why something is happening and did I deserve this, or should I have done something else, or, but just use all the things that go seemingly wrong, whether we've caused them or other people have caused them, whatever, that doesn't matter. Just use them as a means of turning to God with confidence. And then we are led on in our path. So this is the third book John wrote, The Spiritual Canticle. He was living in the south of Spain, very active with the Reform, and he wrote this. This was a poem which he wrote while he was in the prison in 1577, but he wrote this some 20 years after, 15, no, hold on, forgotten the date. About, let me just have a look, when Spiritual Canticle was written. Yes, 17 years afterwards, which is a commentary on the poem, which this poem is in some ways a commentary itself on the biblical poem, the Song of Solomon, the Song of Songs. While he was in prison, John memorized the Song of Songs. He didn't have the reading material there, but he memorized it, and it remained very important to him. At his deathbed, he wanted only the Song of Songs to be read to him. And this poem is a reflection on the Song of Songs, and it expresses the spiritual espousals, but it starts with this sense of seeking God, the beloved. It doesn't even mention God, so it doesn't mention Christ. It calls the beloved, seeking the beloved and not finding the beloved. So it starts in this dark night, but it's led through a relationship of love towards union at the end of the poem. It's a long poem, but it starts on this prison experience. Firstly, the confinement of the prison, being in this small cell, 6 foot by 4 foot, becomes, instead of confinement, becomes an embrace of God's love, to be enclosed in God's love. Held in your love's embrace, this mercy set me free to lift my eyes adoring to your face. It expresses the this sense of coming out of the dark night into a relationship of love. And the face he lifts his eyes to is the face of Christ. This is a painting by El Greco again. But John calls Christ the beloved. The beloved. But in the poem, the journey to the beloved, at first the lover is seeking and not finding, but gradually the lover learns to find the beloved in the beautiful things of this world. All the nature, the beauties of nature, in some way express who the beloved is. So he says, my beloved is the mountains, the solitary wooded valleys. John is remembering the things that he loved, and where even in the cell he could imagine these things, and there he sees the beloved. Strange islands, silent music. All these images in the poem are evocations of the beloved, but also show the fact that people can find God in many things. In many things, God is present, even if they don't necessarily believe in God. The presence of God is there in everything, and they find God. But the eternal springs are hidden deep. So the lover sings, "O woods and thickets, planted by the hand of my beloved, O green meadow, coated bright with flowers, tell me, has he passed by you?" At this point in the poem, the lover is seeking. Oops, moved on. The lover is seeking the actual presence of the beloved, not just the signs of his presence, so the actual presence of the beloved. And there is this moment in the poem halfway where there's the line, "The wounded stag is upon the hill." It says, "Listen, the wounded stag is upon the hill." And the wounded stag is the first image of the beloved in himself. And from then on, this relationship of love between the wounded stag and the wound of the lover becomes the main theme of the poem. So creation is this, the beauty of creation is, in a sense, this garment of the beloved. Pouring out 1,000 graces, he passed through these groves in haste, and having looked at them with his image alone, clothed them in his beauty. Let us rejoice, beloved. Let us go forth to behold ourselves in your beauty. So everything is clothed in the beauty of God, in the beauty of the beloved. Christ is the mere glance of Christ clothes them in divine beauty. And oh yeah, here this is the bit before. Actually, this is before the wounded stag, where he's wanting to find the beloved within, a direct relationship, not mediated through the created world. Oh, spring like crystal, if only on your silvered over face you would suddenly form the eyes I have desired, which I bear sketched deep within my heart. As if he's looking into a lake, if only in your silvered over face you would suddenly form the eyes I have desired, and which I bear sketched deep within my heart. So he's looking within the created world for a direct experience of the source, the spring from which the lake flows. And then the wounded stag stands upon the hill becomes the line of the encounter with the beloved. And from then on, this relationship starts, which is one of love, an intoxication in many ways. It's the espousals of love. In the inner wine cellar, I drank of my beloved. And when I went abroad through all this valley, I no longer knew anything. I lost the herd which I was following. So there was no need to seek for God's signs in creation, because you have the direct experience of God in the inner wine cellar within the heart. He no longer knew anything. and I no longer tend the herd, nor have I any other work, now that my very act is love. In solitude he guides me, he alone, who bears in solitude the wound of love. So John was very active in his work with the reform of the Carmelites, extremely active, but there's also this sense of being deeply contemplative, that he no longer tends the herd, nor have I any other work, now that his every act is love. So he's not a busybody. His every act is love. He's in solitude, he guides me, he alone, who bears in solitude the wound of love. This is the relationship which leads to the union. The union is expressed in the last book of John of the Cross, so we're coming to the end of our talk. The last book of John of the Cross, The Living Flame of Love, talks about the union, which is after the unitive, the illuminative stage is the unitive stage. So in many ways, the spiritual canticle describes that illuminative stage where we get the sense of the experience of God. The unitive stage is where we're transformed into God, and that word transformed is key. It's as if we turn into God. It's a very, it's the real challenge of Christian mysticism to recover this this sort of deeper end of the spiritual journey, which is the unitive path. And John expresses this through one of his poems, which he wrote soon after the prison time, which talks of this transformation. He wrote this commentary on this poem towards the end of his life. John he died in 1591, so he was only 49 years old, and he had this in septicemia. He had this inflammation of his whole foot, his foot and his leg, and then a poisoning of the blood, and was in a state of fever and extreme pain. And he went to take residence in one of the Carmelite Reform convents, but at that point the Carmelite Reform was being led by another friar, and John was being sidelined, and John didn't get a very warm reception when at this convent monastery. By the end, he managed to win them round, but it was prior to this time that he wrote this commentary, and he wrote it for a lay person. The other books were the Ascent and Dark Night were written for his novice friars, and the Spiritual Canticle were written for an abbess, for the nuns, and this one was written for a laywoman who was a widow, so it shows that the unitive path is for lay people as well. It's not just for friars and monks. That John saves the commentary on the unitive path to be written. He writes it for a lay person to show that this is for everybody. And the poem starts with this experience of night, like it goes through the same image of night, but this time the night is no longer, the purification of the night is no longer painful as it is in Dark Night of the Soul, but is painless. It's the purification has done its work. Now the same flame, which was then purifying, now is transforming the soul into God. So it is the living flame of love in the serene night, with the flame that consumes and yet is painless. There's no, the purificatory work has been done. This is the work of transformation. Yeah. Because the image of the burning bush is somewhere in the background. Burning bush and Moses, this flame that comes out of the bush somewhere in the background of this poem, but I'll this, O living flame of love that tenderly wounds my soul in its deepest center, since now you are not oppressive, previously it was, but since now you are not oppressive, now consummate, if it be your will, tear through the veil of this sweet encounter, the final breakthrough, which keeps the lover from the beloved, as separates them, is this veil, this thin veil. But he's now saying, consummate, tear through the veil, so that there's no longer any division between the soul, the lover, and the beloved, the soul and God. And he uses the image of a cautery. This is something he experienced with this septicemia, this inflammation of his leg. That the way they treated it medically in those days was to seal wounds by burning them, which would purify the wound, destroy any bacteria, but also heal the wound in the sense of create the burn itself would heal the wound. So this is the cautery, which is this final wound which actually heals. O sweet cautery, O delightful wound, O gentle hand, O delicate touch, like God is the doctor, that tastes of eternal life and pays every debt. In killing you change death to life. So this is all the trouble that's gone before is now paid back in blessings. Every debt is paid. So then he changes the image from a cautery to lamps of fire, this like the menorah. And there is this lot of studies now on the background of John and Teresa, that they had Jewish background, like many in Spain. Their great-grandparents would have had been conversos who'd come over from Judaism to Christianity during the reconquest of Spain, when the Jews were forced to convert. So some of this imagery evokes some of the Jewish spirituality, particularly here, the lamps of fire, which is the menorah in the Jewish tradition, the 7 lamps of fire. O lamps of fire, in whose splendors the deep caverns of feeling, the deep caverns of the soul, once obscure and blind, now give forth so rarely, so exquisitely, both warmth and light to their beloved. So the soul, or the feelings, are before were in darkness, in these deep caverns, were obscure and blind. This is the dark night. But now these lamps of fire, the sevenfold gifts of the Holy Spirit, bring forth from those caverns warmth and light. So the darkness is changed into light, and the sense of abandonment into a warmth for the beloved. Like a sunrise, the light coming out of the darkness. How what was dark before becomes a source of warmth and light. And then he ends the poem, how gently and lovingly you wake in my heart, where in secret you dwell alone, and in your sweet breathing, filled with good and glory, how tenderly you swell my heart with love. This waking of the beloved within the heart, how gently and lovingly you wake in my heart, where in secret you dwell alone, and in your sweet breathing, filled with good and glory, how tenderly you swell my heart with love. the heart is filled with the love by the beloved waking. The image here is of a giant waking within the heart. He says, the soul has this capacity of a great virtue, because virtue itself is awakening within the heart, so that we become capable of a great love, because love itself is awake in our hearts. I'll come back to that because this sense of the capacity of the soul, and this is one of the striking things in this last book. It's a shorter book, the Living Flame of Love, but it has some unique in this dealing with the union with God, but also the sense of what the dark night is. He says the capacity of the soul is deep like a cavern, because that which can fill the soul is deep, infinite. So the soul is like this deep cavern. That's why it's dark, it's deep, but what can fill it is infinite. In the same way as the cavern is the mirror image of the mountain, of the ascent of Mount Carmel. And this cavern is what can receive the mountain. So it has to be as infinite. The soul is as infinite as God is. And this is why it is a perilous journey into the soul. The dark night of the soul can be difficult because it's so infinite. Nothing can fill it. And when we come to taste that, we can get this sense of disorientation, a sense of emptiness, because nothing can fill it except God. That which can fill the soul is deep, infinite, namely God. So, in a sense, the soul's capacity will be infinite. Its capacity for love is infinite, but also the other capacities which are less pleasant to experience. Its thirst is infinite. Its hunger is deep and infinite. And its sense of pain and disintegration is an infinite death. The soul only becomes fully aware of this when it is alert and ready to receive that which will fill it. It's a very profound statement in that this sense of infinite thirst, infinite hunger, infinite pain and disintegration. We can see that as a problem, but actually it is the state of the soul, and we only see it when we're at the threshold of encountering that which can fill it. So you often get this where people who are trying to fill it in other ways, say drink or drugs or depression or anything which is filling the soul. There comes a point where it seems there's no end to it. And then you get we're falling apart completely, drinking endlessly, or the depression is endless, and suicide happens. But if we could at that point realize that this, and this is what programs like Alcoholics Anonymous show, at that point we can realize that there is something which can fill it. There is some higher power, some and this journey into the depths of the soul is only so that we become fully aware of those depths and are able to open them to the love of God, so that the greatest we would be less capable, or our capacity for God would be less unless we were led into those deep places which seem so uncomfortable to be in. Anyway, that's maybe a bit of an explanation of how this process of a living flame of love turns the deep caverns of the soul into pools of light. what was before dark and obscure becomes warm and light. And just to end with, John ends with this image of this transformation, saying the whole process can be depicted as like a fire burning. And the fire, if you put wood in fire, the wood and the fire are separate. This is the soul and God. They seem separate, and the beginning of the process of the transformation seems to darken the wood. The impurities come out of the wood. The wood seems brighter before it's gone into the fire. When it goes into the fire, it becomes darker. And he says that's a bit like going through the dark night of the soul. The impurities come out. There's lots of smoke. The wood turns black. This is part of the process of the purification. It's the drying out of the wood, and so that the wood can really encounter the fire. And gradually the fire in the wood burns to the point where the fire enters the wood, and the wood becomes light. The wood glows with the same heat and warmth as and light as the fire does. And this is the beginning of the transformation, until finally the wood becomes fire. You can't tell the difference between wood and fire, because they're one, and the wood is consumed in the fire and becomes fire. He says that there's a point in this where in any fire when a leap of flame comes out, and it's that point which shows the point when the wood has been penetrated by the fire and the transformation is happening. And it's this leap of flame which is the living flame of love, when we realize that the soul is being transformed into love, and the sparks that come out of that flame become our way of loving other people. John says that we're not so much doing good works as we're allowing this flame to burn in the soul, and the sparks come out naturally and set flame to those people around us. It may be a smile, it may be just a little action, which is more like a spark of love, which is taken out of the fire within us and transmitted to other people, rather than trying to do necessarily anything. It happens naturally from this experience of love. The heart is on fire with love. I'll just end by going back to I missed that slide I missed, which is on an important side of John of the Cross, which is throughout his writings, which is on this pastoral, this spiritual guidance side. And he is the uniqueness of John of the Cross is he's a mystic who's very clear in his expression. He's trying to make things very clear through his scholastic training. But he's also very pastoral. He's also trying to help people on their journey by reassuring them through all sorts of imagery. He says people may feel that they're being abandoned by God, but he says, think of a mother who is trying to teach his child to walk. It lets the child come out of her hands in order to walk. And it's a bit like that with God. God lets us go out of his hands in order to walk, and then we turn to come back to God. Or like a mother taking the child off the breast food in order to give it substantial food at a certain point in the child's life. It seems that moment that we're being separated from the mother, but actually it's only so that we can have more substantial food. We can't live on the breast food all the time. And the experience of darkness. He says that it's only God only appears as darkness because we are learning that God is not an object. Normally, we look for God in things, as we look for God as an object, but the darkness is the experience of darkness is being led into the experience, is actually being led closer to God because we're being no longer seeing God as an object. He says it's like that we don't see the light in itself. We only see the light as it's reflected off objects. This is clear nowadays through space. Yeah, if we go out of this planet, Earth, we go closer to the sun, and yet we are going into darkness because there's no objects out there for the sun to reflect off. And he says it's like that in the spiritual life. Once the objects are removed, we enter into this darkness, but it's not because we're further from the sun. We're actually closer to the sun. And so he's reassuring people that these difficult experiences are part of the growth pattern in the spiritual life, and not to be worried and not to be self-critical or think that somehow we've failed, because it's part of the journey. And then also he reassures people that everybody's different. There's no one path for everybody. God carries each person along a different road, so that you will scarcely find two people following the same route in even half of their journey to God. It seems sometimes with John of the Cross, because he has this structure, that he's saying this is the way it goes, but then he's also very aware of the uniqueness of each person. And the spiritual direction is about being a friend so we get to know the uniqueness of the person who we're with, and that there's no preconceived path that people will necessarily follow. It will be unique, but everybody will go through these times of darkness, these times of illumination, these times of when the caverns of the soul seem to open, and then these times when the caverns seem to fill with the union with God. The wood is transformed into the fire. So this is maybe something of the richness of John of the Cross. That it's not just doom and gloom, but there's a greater sense of journey. There's a sense of journey from suffering into joy. But it's not a journey which is necessarily going to come overnight, so that we have to be reassured all the way along that even when things go wrong, that God is still with us, and that we can trust, have confidence in the love of God. So thank you for listening to this talk. I've gone over the time substantially. During the actual live talk, I was able to cut things out, but you've been very patient to stay to the end. So I hope you found benefit in it. Many thanks. Bye.